So we've got a 2004 F250 here, 6-liter diesel. It's been bulletproofed. Got a leak in a head gasket, so I got it apart and I'll show you why. Okay, so we took a whizzer wheel to this thing and thought maybe that would make it flat. Well, it doesn't. It actually makes it quite wavy, but you can see we had a leak going on right here in between the cylinders, and you can see the soot built up in there. And then here we had a leak between the cylinders, a little bit of a leak right there too, and this is going to get in between the layers of the gasket, and it's going to find its way. You know, there's in the block, it doesn't show it here, but in the block there's a hole in the block where the, you know, directly into the coolant right here on between each cylinder on the block. So, you know, it's going to push that pressure, that combustion pressure, right into that hole. I'll show you where the hole's at there. Right here, these holes right here. So the other problem that these have, and in talking to them, there's a teenager involved here. It's not his truck, but he asked me some questions last night that, you know, about things that made me wonder, you know, gee, I wonder why it has a blown head gasket. But anyway, so what we're probably going to do here, I'll send these heads in, I'm going to have them pressure tested, we're going to see if they have any cracks in them, and then resurface them, check the valve recession, and you know, reuse them if they're still good. But what I'm going to suggest to them is that we do a coolant return on these, because the problem with these is that they don't move a lot of coolant through the cylinder head. Put the glasses on here. So this is the return. This will be your low pressure, where, you know, your coolant is going to go into the block here. It's going to come up. There's only steam holes here, little on the gasket. Yeah, see here, they kind of got them, you know, they have like a metered orifice in all of these holes. So the only open holes you have are here and there, and here and there and there, and that's only in the back. Well, I guess, yeah, this one has one up here in the front too. So anyway, that coolant has to come up. It's going to make its way up through the bigger holes, of course, because they're not metered. These slotted holes, they're all metered. And the idea is that it's going to push that coolant up in through the head, and the low pressure side is on this end, and it's going to, you know, push any air or anything is going to come out through here. Well, the problem with that is that you can get air trapped in that cylinder head, and it'll just hang out in there. So wherever you have air, you're going to have a hot spot. And I'm not surprised to see that only the left side cylinder head gasket is blown on this, because of the way the heads and the block were prepared. That doesn't surprise me at all. But ordinarily, you're going to see the head on this side, or the gasket on this side, fail. And part of the problem is this return port here, where it returns back into the front cover, into the thermostat housing here, is actually, I mean, it's pretty convoluted, and it's actually smaller than this side here. This side here can flow out pretty freely, so if there's any air in the cylinder head, it can get pushed out of there. This side here, you have a little bit more of a restriction. Well, I'd say a lot bit more of a restriction, you know, in looking at it and kind of measuring stuff up when I've had the front covers off. So it's generally going to be this head that gets the hottest. You know, you're going to have hot spots in this head if you get any air in there at all. So one of those return kits, basically what they do is they're gonna, you know, you're gonna put them on what would be the rear of the head. These heads are interchangeable. You're gonna drill into here, and you're gonna run a hose. It's gonna come up here, and it's gonna tap in right into the thermostat housing. So any air that's in there, the idea is that when that coolant starts moving, it's gonna get to the, you know, if there's any air in there, it's gonna push it right out of the cylinder head and return it back to the return. So, and then come out through one of the degas lines. So I've used a couple of them. My friend Jason hasn't called me and told me I sucked yet, so I guess at least the one, we were having trouble with his. Apparently it's still working and holding up. So but it seems like a good idea to me. So especially if they're going to sounds like they're going to rip on this thing a little bit, so we want to give it all the help we can. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to get the cylinder heads cleaned up and get them down to the machine shop and have them checked and you know, for cracks and for leaks, and then, you know, check the valve seal on them, make sure the valves are all sealing, and then surface them, and then get them back on there. Got a whole bunch of cleaning up to do here, but no big deal. So anyway, I'll when I get this thing put back together, I'll come back and tell you how great it is. Another bulletproof 6.0. So we were inspecting our deck surface here before I cleaned it, and of course we used the roll-lock disc on this too. And the problem with doing that is this is a machine surface, and you know, it looks really pretty when you're done with it. You can get all the staining off of the iron, you know, because you can clean this up and it's gonna be stained, all that dark stuff on there. You'll never get that off of there without machining it. Well, when you take a roll-lock disc, what you're doing is you're making the surface uneven, and even though it has a multi-layer steel gasket, you know, same thing on the cylinder head. You're going to put two uneven surfaces together, and you know, when that thing's clamped down, I mean, there's so much cylinder pressure during the combustion that and plus when you have boost going, like when you're pulling a load, you know, you're trying to keep that in there. And especially disturbing to me is you know, if you look around the fire ring, I don't know how well it's showing up, but I can see the swirl marks all around the fire rings. And if you look at number 7, between 5 and 7 there, you can see where it's been leaking on the deck side. I don't like to see them leaking on the deck side. That's bad news. I mean, if it's leaking on the head side, which it was, but this is leaking on both sides, and that's a little bit disturbing. And you'll notice the triangle down right, where's it at, right there. I mean, that goes right into the block, into the cooling. And so when you're pushing combustion out of your fire ring, out of your cylinder, it's going through the gasket because it's a multi-layer. We have space in there, and it pushes it right into the cooling system. So that's why it pukes it out the degas bottle. So what I'm going to have to do with this is clean it up, and then you know, stuff some rags in where the lifters are there, clean this all up. And they're running green coolant too, I see. I have a stone, a 12-inch long stone, and I'll make 3 or 4 passes over this surface and see where we're at. You know, when you do this to the block and the head, you know, you're diminishing your chances of having a successful seal, you know, long term on your head gasket. So, you know, I wish people wouldn't do that. I thought everybody knew that. I mean, it's been years and years and years, and it, you know, you don't have to be the sharpest pencil in the drawer to know that, hey, that's a machine surface. I shouldn't use a little inch or inch and a half disc on there, you know, freehand and you know, make it look all pretty, because yeah, it looks all pretty, but it's, you know, not flat. So the other thing they did on this too is on these cylinder heads, the rocker carrier bolts on here. On the early ones, they actually had 8 bolts in them to bolt them down, plus the head bolts going through them, hold them down. And then there's a gasket in here. They also clean this surface up here too. And this is a machine surface. It probably won't leak, but you know, I mean, just making it look pretty is not, you know, you can make it look pretty all day long, and it's, you know, it ain't right. It's a machine surface. I did run it's probably not showing up here, but I did run my stone across this because we're going to surface this anyway, you know, after we have the valves checked and have it checked for cracks. and check the valve recession right now to see how much we can go on them, because there is a spec for that. It's basically only touching on the outside, of course. You know, all of this in here is low. So, and there's all kinds of low spots in here, especially in the center, which is pretty typical when you pull these heads off. But this one over here was even worse. You know, after I cleaned it up, I got to, I just was curious, you know, I wanted to know how badly this head was warped. When you measure these, you want to take your straight edge, go from here across these bolts, and then stick your feeler gauge under there. And Ford spec is 2000s. That's too much for these. You shouldn't be able to get a, you know, maybe a half a thou in there, you know, or maybe 1,000. But you know, 2000s is too much. Anyway, you got to do everything you can to keep these heads on there. I mean, you put studs in them. This head's still going to move around with studs. You're going to get thermal cycles. You know, it's going to be expanding and contracting basically when it cools off at different temperatures. And this head is going to move around, you know, no matter what you do to it, because you have two pieces of metal bolted together and you got a whole bunch of fire going on in these, you know, in these areas here, and gets hot, it's going to move. So you want to do everything that you can to make sure both of these surfaces are as straight as they can be and as flat as they can be. There's not much you can do with the deck surface. All you can really do is clean it up. What'll happen is in these areas here, you can't see it now because somebody's roll locked it, and these head gaskets didn't last very long at all. But in the areas between these two coolant ports here, you'll get pitting. You'll get pitting down in here because coolant will migrate in there and it'll set in there, and it'll, you know, eventually it'll start pitting that in those areas. So you have low spots in here. And what somebody did, I mean, you know, typically they all look like that when they have, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10 years later, you know, 15 years later, you're going to have that pitting in there. If you take all that out of there, now you're going to have low spots in all those areas where you made that pitting look real pretty. And then they went around the fire ring too, and that's really, really, really bothering me, because that's where the seal is. This one was sealing pretty good, except for these two rear cylinders. And this one here a little bit, you can see some soot migration up in there. That's soot. You might think that that's coolant, but no, that's soot. It's leaking. You know, they're going to leak to a very small degree, and you're going to get that soot buildup in there. And it doesn't take long for that to, you know, eventually eat up that gasket, and then, you know, you're blowing it right into the cooling system up here in these areas. But this one was blowing it down in the triangle right there. The combustion was coming out. It looks like maybe both, well, that cylinder number 5 looks like it was sealing, but 7 definitely wasn't. So it was migrating into that triangle coolant passage there. So let's really scare ourselves and go look at the other side. I didn't really look at it. So oh, my foot's stuck. Okay. Well, actually this side looks like it was sealing up pretty good, but on the cylinder head side, between, I think it was these cylinders 6 and 8, it was doing similar to what it was doing over there, but it was on the head side of the gasket. So, you know, ordinarily you pull a head off and you see this, you know, it's pretty shiny all the way around. I don't see any soot around there or discoloration. So actually this gasket on the deck surface was sealing pretty good, but it was leaking on the head side, because I could see, you know, where the discoloration was. around these areas here where the firing seal goes. So yeah, and they, of course, yeah, I can see my roll-lock disc marks on here. So you're not going to machine it by hand and get it flat. It takes machinery to do that. You know, you have to use a machine to surface that, and it's precision, believe it or not. So apparently some people don't understand that. Just because it looks clean and shiny doesn't mean it's right or proper, and this definitely isn't. So I'm gonna I'll take my block on both sides after I clean them up, and I'll make 3 or 4 passes over it, and that'll show me what, because my block is flat, it's a straight. It'll show me how bad a shape this is in, and we'll kind of go from there. But anyway, yeah, don't use your roll-lock disc on these. Don't get them anywhere near these. There's only one use I can think of for those, and that would be if you're going to weld something and you want to clean some rust off. Otherwise, keep them as far away from engines as you can, because they're no good. So we got our cylinder heads back from the machine shop. We'll take a look at them here. Check the valve recession. It's within spec. Nice, smooth, flat surface. The other thing that we're going to do here too, this still has the original rocker arm retainers, and they're really brittle. See, I just broke that one just pushing on it. If you don't change these, a lot of times what happens is they'll do that when you're putting it together, and then you'll have that piece of plastic floating around in there. And, this is kind of a hokey way to do it, but I guess it works. So on the block deck, I did my best on it. I mean, they did take the roll-lock disc to it, but all of our I checked the clearance between all the bolts, both this direction and that direction, and I can get a thousandths in between the one back here. There's not much I can do about it, unless we machine it. So it's really important that you don't use a roll-lock disc on these when you're cleaning them up. I know it looks really pretty and it's all shiny, but pretty and shiny isn't flat, and you're not going to get a seal. And that's exactly what happened here. You do that to the cylinder heads and to the block, I mean, you basically just ruined it. You're going to have to do some serious work to get it straightened out. So we're going to pull the oil cooler out, finish cleaning everything up, and start putting this thing back together. So we'll come back and see how it runs.